Hello and welcome to Cottage Class Online. This week we're going to look at the conversation between Moses and God in the book of Exodus and see what kind of lessons we can learn that will help us live our lives today. Now, if you remember, this point is when Israel had grown so large that the Egyptians became afraid of them, so they enslaved them. And Moses, who was supposed to be killed as one of the male children so that the Israelites would stop being so large, had gotten away, and Pharaoh's daughter had taken him in and raised him. He saw the plight of his people. He saw an Egyptian beating an Israelite, and he killed the Egyptian, and then he had to flee. And he became a shepherd out in the desert. And while he became a shepherd, he was tending the flock one day and noticed this bush burning up in the mountain, and went up to see it and saw this bush and met God. And he had this conversation with God where God said he saw the plight of his people. In fact, when we start in chapter 3, verse 7 and 8, it says, "Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their suffering, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to a place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites." What we can glean from this is that God hears us when we're in pain. When we pray to God and we are suffering, whether it's from physical pain or emotional pain or just a very difficult time in our lives, God hears us and he cares. He's not this God that sits up on high, that ignores our lives and doesn't care what happens to us. He's always there listening, and he cares, and he'll help us when we need it. Now, how does he help us? We learn that in verses 9 and 10. It says, "And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come up to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." God uses us to answer prayers. That's an amazing thing when you think about that. If someone is praying for help and guidance, sometimes God sends us to provide that help and guidance. So anytime we see the opportunity to do good, we need to do so, because in doing so, we could be answering somebody's prayer and doing the work of God. Isn't that an amazing thought? Now in Exodus chapter 3, verses 11 and 12, we read, "Moses said to God, 'Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?' He said, God said, 'But I will be with you, and this shall be a sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain.'" Now Moses was absolutely right. He had no power. In fact, he had no influence. He was a murderer. He was a wanted man in Egypt. But God says, "I will be with you." And the thing we can remember from that is that we have no power. But when God is with us, we can't lose. There's nothing that we can't handle. It's in Philippians, I believe it was Paul who said, "I can do all things through Jesus Christ who strengthens me." He wasn't talking about career-wise. He was talking about, I can handle anything that God needs me to do because I am strengthened through Jesus Christ. In Exodus chapter 4, verse 1, we read, Then Moses answered, "But behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.' And the Lord said to him, 'What's that in your hand?' He said, 'A staff.' He said, 'Throw it on the ground.' So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it." You know what that means? It's not our job to convince others. God will do the convincing. Moses was not going to be able to convince the elders that he was from God. But it was God who gave him the serpent, or the staff that would turn into a serpent. If you remember, his hand would turn leprous. Or if he poured water on the ground, it would turn into blood. He gave him these three symbols to prove that he was from God. It was God who did the proving, not Moses. We can apply the same thing to us today. It's not our job to convince people to come to Jesus Christ. It's our job to spread the word. God will be the one convincing them. He will be working on their hearts. If you remember the parable of the sower didn't go around looking for just the right ground to put his seed on. He cast it everywhere. And some fell on good ground, some on rocky ground, some on weed-filled ground, and they all grew according to the type of heart that they fell on. But he didn't decide which ground to throw it on. He threw it on them all. It wasn't his job to pick them out. It was his job to cast the seeds. Just like if you remember in 1 Corinthians, when they were struggling there, Paul said, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. You see, we can teach someone all about Jesus Christ, and they may not accept it. And then someone else may teach them a little bit more about Jesus Christ. But until their heart is right and God is ready to work on their heart, it's God who does the convincing. We just deliver the message. And I think that's a very comforting thought. Now Moses gives another excuse to God, and an excuse we use all the time ourselves. In chapter 4, verses 10 through 12, he said, But Moses said to the Lord, O Lord, I'm not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and tongue. Then the Lord said to him, Who's made your mouth? Who made him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be your mouth and teach you what you should speak. You know what we get out of this? Is God equips us with everything we need to do his will. We talked about last week the parable of the talents. We each have different abilities. God gives us those abilities. If we don't use them, God won't be pleased with us. And here Moses is trying to get out of it, saying, I can't go talk to Pharaoh. I'm not a big speaker. And God says, I made you. If I tell you you can do it, you can do it. And I'll be with you. Again, he tells him he'll be with him. So anything that we need to do for God, we can do. God has given us that ability. He has equipped us. He has made us. And we are wonderfully made. Finally, in Exodus chapter 4, verses 13 through 14, he said, Oh my Lord, please send someone else. And then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And he said, Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. Basically, what happens here? Moses says, send somebody else, and God says, no. You can take Aaron with you, but you're still going. See, what I get out of this is that God expects each and every one of us to do our part. He requires it of us. Again, we go back to the parable of the talents. That's exactly what the parable of the talents is talking about. He has given us abilities, and he expects us to fulfill the talents that he gives us. So it's something that we should soberly consider. What abilities do I have, and am I using them the way God would have me to use them? Am I doing my part? As you can see, just in that short section of Exodus, there is so much wealth for us in how we live our lives today. And there's tons more as you read through the book of Exodus. I challenge you to do so. I think you'll find it very enjoyable. Again, these are my thoughts about Moses and God and the conversation. What are yours?